in school assemblies, I used to perform the Bartman.
And he says, but no shooting of Mark, that is my red line. And in his mind, he's like, God, I'm such a good friend.
Hello and welcome to The Best Ever, where we come out swinging for our opinions. I'm Morgan Jeffrey, Executive Editor at radiotimes.com, and I'm joined once again by a panel of guests. Each of them has come armed with an opinion. Their job is to convince me that their pick, and only theirs, deserves the title of The Best Ever. This episode, it's no laughing matter as we debate the best ever TV comedy. Joining me on the panel are comedian and writer Dane Baptiste, Nancy Harris, writer-creator of TV comedy drama The Dry, and Christian Tobin, radiotimes.com's comedy connoisseur. Thank you all for joining me. Dane, welcome to The Best Ever. In your opinion, without giving away your choice just yet, what are the ingredients of a truly great TV comedy?
Very good question. What are the ingredients of a very good comedy? I would say that relatability in terms of the premises, for the jokes within the comedy is a big part of it as well. I think if, especially I guess within the subgenre of sitcom, the more it's relatable in terms of how people approach the situation, the better. I would say gag rate. That can kind of be very varied, whether it's kind of very fast-paced, then obviously a gag rate kind of has to match the fast pace of that show. Whether someone can have a longer running joke throughout, as subtext throughout an episode, probably very important as well. And then for me, I just think it's originality. I think that it can be a very saturated genre of entertainment. So the more you're able to distinguish yourself from the others out there, the better.
And having that sense of identity and personality.
Yeah, and definitely being one that can be either inspirational or influential.
Well, Nancy, again, don't give away your pick just yet, but how easy or difficult was it for you to pick a best ever TV comedy?
Impossible, nearly impossible. It felt like killing a child. It really did, because it felt like you're trying to decide what are the things that have shaped you, molded you from growing up, what are the things that you really admire, what are the things that you think were brave in what they tried to do, the risks that they tried to take. And comedy is so wide and varied. And also what kind of voices were we not hearing? Because growing up, there were very few female comics at all. And so I was always kind of wanting to see shows by women, which is ironic given what I've picked, because but I went for comedy. I went for that.
Yeah. Well, do you want to shout out some honourable mentions before we get into your
absolutely
pick?
Fabulous. Obviously, Fawlty Towers, like Curb Your Enthusiasm, Catastrophe, Pulling, The Royal Family, The Simpsons, 30 Rock, The Thick of It, The Office. I mean, I could just keep going on.
That really is a long list, not a short list.
And I probably could have argued the same for all of them.
Yeah, with the same passion.
If you'd said, like, pick this one.
Yeah, well, thank you for pinning it down just to one. 99,
Julie Davies.
Well, Christian, you are a resident Radio Times expert.
That's a lot of pressure.
But how confident are you going up against Dane and Nancy, two comedy powerhouses here on the panel?
I feel like they've got some quality picks. If those were the ones you didn't pick, then I'm dreading to think what you did pick. I'm really nervous. I think I've got faith in mine. It's an enduring classic. I think all ages like it. It's going strong.
Well, okay.
I think I've got this down. We could wrap up now if you fancy. Just finish at leisure, like and subscribe, go home. I think I'm confident.
Okay. Well, don't forget, whoever emerges as today's winner will be awarded our coveted Best Ever trophy. One of you will be crowned the king or queen of comedy, and for the other two, tragedy. Dane, let's get into it. What is, in your opinion, the best ever TV comedy?
I feel like it's a simple choice, in many ways an expected choice, but I think it's definitely a justified choice. And for me, it would be The Simpsons.
Okay, you're going to struggle to argue against this, given you already mentioned it as one of your favourites.
I think it's probably an outlier choice, but I'm going to stick with it because I think it's aging well, and it's not that old, and that is Peep Show.
Okay, so all right, we're already, Christian,
strong. Okay,
quaking in his boots. We've got Simpsons, we've got Peep Show. Dane, why is The Simpsons the best ever TV comedy?
I think, first of all, being able to be the quintessential animated sitcom, one that kind of launched hundreds of attempts to mimic the same subgenre of comedy. I think that given that when most people think about the idea of a sitcom, there's a lot of American connotations, and I think that there has never been a better show that's been able to capture and crystallize Americana and parody it in a way that has straddled, whether it's bipartisan ideology, satire, as well as just being entertaining. I don't think any other show has done a better job of doing that. I think, and by that same token, if you want to see an example of the best satire of Western civilization in general, I think it works in that respect as well. And also the fact that it started off in itself being a spin-off of the Tracy Ullman show as well, and has, done the same thing that kind of Jordan trainers have done with Nike and been able to distinguish itself so massively that people forget that there was even a link between them.
Yeah.
I think it was very successful doing that. And I think that the only flaw being the fact that because it has outlasted every other television show has been the only drawback to its attempt to create other comedy premises, is because it's been able to parody everything and has outlasted everything. But yeah, I think it's pretty much a television institution.
I mean, how serious is your Simpsons fandom? Can you quote entire episodes? Can you do the Bartman?
Both, yeah. I remember as a kid in school that in school assemblies I used to perform the Bartman. And then the second single, Deep Trouble, which most people don't know as well.
Deep Trouble is a deep cut.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
wow. Okay, so we're dealing with a real expert here. I didn't realise. The Simpsons, it does have such wide-ranging appeal, and it manages to appeal to both younger viewers and to adults, but without feeling like it's family-friendly, like it's sort of talking down to either audience. How does it effortlessly straddle that line, do you think?
I think The Simpsons, the way it's been very effective is being able to appeal to both younger and older audiences and Asian audiences, like myself, has been just the fact that, having the aesthetic of a cartoon and not being too grounded in realism aesthetically, probably one of its best tools, because I just enjoyed it being a funny animated show. I think as I've gotten older and been able to broaden my horizons and been able to consume more art and be more aware of different iconography and parts of Americana, it's made aspects of The Simpsons and some of the jokes be able to be understood on a different level. And I think that's always the mark of a good piece of art, is that it can capture a particular point in time, but you can kind of return to it when you've become more evolved in terms of your own artistic palette and appreciate on different levels. So for example, in the case of The Simpsons, like I saw The Simpsons before I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I saw it before I saw The Shining. So I found like the homages to these amazing other iconic films funny, but then once I understood the films and understood the references, it made it even more rewarding to kind of watch the stuff as well. So
I still feel like the musical Guys and Dolls has a song called "We're Just a Bunch of Crazy Guys and Dolls" from The Simpsons, and it doesn't.
Well, it's a real shame as well that Planet of the Apes doesn't have, like the musical version of Planet of the Apes that's in The Simpsons is better than any cinematic interpretation of Planet of the Apes.
I think I probably knew the words to Dr. Zaius before I even heard the song by Falco by Rock Me Amadeus.
That totally went over my head the first time, but it's just such a great tune anyway.
Absolutely.
And so many incredible characters that populate Springfield in The Simpsons. Could you possibly pick a favourite character?
Very, very tough. I think it's a really hard one, but I think there was a point in which like maybe season 4 to like 7, and I feel like, I think Homer Simpson was probably the funniest person on television at the time. So that, if I'm forced, it'd be there. But it's such a tough one because there are lines that come from other members of the cast or the citizens of Springfield, which I find so funny. So it's more in between season that some people have kind of stood out and had amazing episodes, because like while I would say like Homer Simpson consistently has been one of the funniest characters, obviously, like even today, I will say to my partner, Iron helps us play. And she understands the reference. So it's a hard one, but I'd probably go with Homer at a push.
Simpsons is probably one of the most quotable TV shows of all time. Is that important in a TV comedy, that quotability, that you refer back to lines and moments?
I think it's important, but I think that, and I think The Simpsons has maybe typified this in the best way, is that you don't necessarily have to chase catchphrases, and I think they even did an episode where they kind of referenced that point of how stale and the life cycle of having catchphrase comedy can be with Bart and the whole I didn't do it episode.
Yeah.
But I think it's more with these things that it's much more organic, and I think that in terms of the level of world building that's happened with The Simpsons, to have people still be able to quote certain lines is just kind of like, for me, indicative of how amazing and influential a show it is. I think it's just, I think, yeah, just some of the quotable, I think for me, some of the less known catchphrases and quotables are really what gives the show a lot more life. So.
Because I'm just thinking of the obvious one that Homer always gives, which is "It's funny because it's true," which is also what comedy is.
Yeah.
So much.
Because even then, it's like in the delivery that he does it in.
Yeah.
There's definitely the idea that there is a voice that understands like comedy tropes, and even how to kind of send those up and make that part of the dialogue as well.
Well, Nancy, that's a strong start from Dane.
It's a really strong start.
But one of the longest running TV comedies of all time. But then Peep Show, one of the longest running, I think Channel 4's longest running scripted comedy. What for you makes Peep Show the best ever TV comedy?
I think for me, it's the form, the daring form to be inside two people's heads. And that's been talked about a lot, but in a strange way, a lot of the great comedies like The Office and things like that, I wonder whether the slight documentary form now feels of a time. Whereas I was rewatching Peep Show for this, and I actually feel listening to people's heads, their thoughts, the contradictions, the venality, the selfishness is so refreshing, especially in this moment where technically we all have an opinion online, but we're also really fearful of our opinions and ourselves to some extent. And so to live in two characters who are kind of, one of whom is kind of in constant terror and self-disgust and self-loathing, and the other doesn't have enough of it, feels really exciting. And I have to say, like when I didn't come to Peep Show till it had been on for about 4 or 5 seasons, and I was in my 20s in London, and I had just moved, and I think the idea of watching a kind of a Beavis and Butthead style show with 2 men would have been the least appealing thing I could possibly imagine. And then I started watching it, and I was living with 3 other girls, and we all became obsessed. And I think it was, it was a lot of things. It was kind of having an interesting insight into these characters, but also like what happens to the world if we can hear our thoughts, just became. And I also think, as a sitcom, most of our kind of classics, apart from The Simpsons, which is a genius choice, but have 2 seasons. Like in England, like it's 1 or 2 seasons. Father Ted, same, whereas they have gone for 9 and they didn't drop the standard. And season 9 is brilliant. And so I think I think for daring form and creating that kind of art and going that way, I think they're the best.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Simpsons so influential, as you say, so many imitators. Something like The Office, you then saw a wave of mockumentary style comedies, some of which I felt like used that gimmick, that format better than others. There are some shows where I'm like, something like Modern Family, which is a great show, but I'm like, it doesn't actually make any sense that this is a mockumentary because the characters are acting in such a way. It does then just become a gimmick. But Peep Show, that POV style, hearing characters' inner thoughts, it's not really something that's been
because I think it's really
imitated.
hard to do.
Yeah.
And you can, and like when I was reading about it, they had to, because they developed it as it went on. You can see it becomes more sophisticated, the shots. But it's really hard to. You have to kind of, if somebody reaches for you and then you come out from the other POV, you've got to mimic that shot again. There's a huge amount of detail beyond even the brilliant writing. And I also really liked the fact, and I think they were slightly ahead of their time as well, in male sexuality, because it seemed like it was a show about 2 heterosexual guys, and then that was not at all the way it went. It was right there in season 1, you've got the Johnson, Mark kind of sadomasochistic man crush, do I love you thing. Jeremy by the end is in a gay relationship. It felt like I think
even Hans kind of, there was
super
a
Hans and Jez have
fluidity there as well.
There was always this kind of, which was, if you think about like the 90s, the early noughties, was all very lads, loaded. That was the comedy. And Peep Show was like, actually sexuality is a spectrum. Male heterosexuality, which we all think we've become very familiar with in a certain way, actually has a lot of different directions. It just felt now, obviously things date, but it feels like it was sort of ahead of its time in a lot of the conversations.
And again, endlessly quotable. The secret ingredient is crime is again just something I will just quote totally out of context. It's not the most obviously mainstream shows, some quite dark and
very dark,
twisted moments. I mean, they eat a dog at one point. Let's not dance around it.
Love it.
But it became a huge, popular, mainstream success. How did that happen?
I think because deep down we all have wrong thoughts.
Yeah.
And they're always kind of slightly shafting each other. Like, you know, Jeremy goes off with Sophie and then gets really guilty and joins the Scientology style cult. And, you know, there's a very funny kind of bit in season 9 where Jez is kind of going to almost get involved in a bank robbery in Mark's bank. And he says, you know, but no shooting of Mark, that is my red line. And in his mind, he's like, God, I'm such a good friend. You know the way, and when we make these small acts of bravery, we congratulate ourselves. You know, you can hear the thoughts. There's where Jobby takes on a taxi driver for a xenophobic rant and Mark is kind of going, well, I would have said something eventually. And, you know, we all have those moments where we wish we'd acted with more strength, courage, decency or bravery, where and so much of Peep Show comes out of social awkwardness and sexual
Well, there's a lot of
awkwardness.
sexual awkwardness in Peep Show as well.
But it does feel like, in a way, it's a comedy of manners, but you just can hear the thoughts inside the head.
Yeah.
I find it quite an anxious watch. Like, it's hilarious. My palms get sweaty watching Peep Show.
The
wedding episode in particular is one of my favourite
amazing.
episodes.
Yeah.
I've seen it so many times now, but every single time I watch it, I'm still there kind of dreading
When they're
what's going to
both
happen.
crying
Don't
at
do
the
this,
altar.
both crying at the altar and upstairs urinating on the thing.
I think it's the end of the 3rd series, which is where the Quantox, where Mark and Jez get lost on, and then Mark sort of realizes that he doesn't want to marry Sophie, but then she agrees to marry him, and the final line is, "I win, sort of." And I love that. He's just sort of like, I finally like get the girl, but I've decided that actually it's genius.
It is genius.
But Christian, you're up against The Simpsons and Peep Show, 2 of the most acclaimed comedies of all time.
Yeah, good luck.
So no pressure.
Yeah.
But what do you have to say in your defense?
I was going for another acclaimed comedy, critically acclaimed comedy, commercially successful as well. People love it. I think the best ever TV comedy is Frasier. So I'm going to bring out the big guns. Going to bring out Frasier.
Yeah.
Right. So why is Frasier the best ever TV comedy? First of all, I think it's blindingly well written.
Yes.
Brilliantly well written. Really well scripted. It manages to pull off this kind of high wire act of being at one stage a kind of a so-called kind of like smart thinking person's comedy that throw out literary allusions or Dostoevsky or operettas, things most of the audience might not know.
Yeah.
But equally at the same time, it's a very silly, farcical, kind of broad comedy with a lot of slapstick in it as well.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I think quite often it does get described as, it's a smart comedy. And I think that's more just because the characters are not necessarily smart even, but they're educated. But you're right in that there are some episodes that are pure, brilliant farce.
Just complete farce, And they're it's a show about privilege, really, but it's a show that skewers that worldview, right? So it's not appealing to the people that it's showing at all. In real life, you wouldn't want to hang around with Fraser Crane. He's a pompous buffoon. You really wouldn't want to spend much time with him.
Yeah.
But the show does a really good job of kind of bringing these characters down, tearing them down. And like with the kind of illusions, I mean, I was watching it 7 years old, I was watching Frasier, and Niles would say to Frasier, you put the pig in Pygmalion. I had no idea what Pygmalion was, but I got the joke. It's the inference of the writing and the performances. So I think it marries those two better than any other show. I think the characters, I think the performances are fantastic. From top to bottom of the cast, Kelsey Grammer, David Hyde Pierce, Jane Leeves, they're all doing their best role. They've all gone on to do brilliant stuff afterwards, but no one does that kind of hangdog, neurotic psychic better than David Hyde Pierce. No one does kind of world-weary, put-upon producer better than Perry Gilpin as Roz. They're all playing their best parts. Even the side characters, you've got Bulldog and you've got Lilith, Eddie the dog, who's a personal hero of mine, and then Meris, who is like probably the greatest unseen character in all of comedy. If you ever want to laugh, check out the Wikipedia page for Meris, because some dedicated Frasier fan has compiled all of Niles' anecdotes about
Brilliant.
what this impossible person is like, and it's just made a biography out of it. And I think they did originally intend to cast the role,
Yeah.
but it just became, no one
couldn't
can play
cast
this.
it.
This not a
Because
real
she's so
human being.
thin and she can't eat or
She wasted away, she murdered someone and ran away to an island. So her biography is incredible. So all those, just those side characters are fantastic.
And Frasier, of course, was a spin-off, and Cheers was huge. It was
Yeah.
like the biggest comedy in America at the time. Frasier sort of didn't have any right to be as good as it was.
Yeah.
Why do you think it succeeded despite going up against such high expectations?
I think it managed to kind of tap into the idea of blending the kind of farcical with the clever. It makes it doesn't speak down to the viewer. Kind of it treats the viewer as okay, you're going to get this. You're going to go along with this. Dedicated performances, committed performances. I think particularly with British fans, we have to say there's a very special place in the heart of UK fans for Frasier, and that place is 10 a.m. Monday to Fridays on Channel 4. That will never be broken in the schedule. That is an unstoppable schedule.
It's a ritual for the average commuter as well, where those two worlds can meet. I suppose like you would have your kind of like learned intellectual and working class hero would meet like on a train and stuff like that as well. So
Definitely.
whenever I see Frasier before you go into work, I'm like, I can relate.
Years ago, I was on a journalism course, and one of the other students on the course was wildly late one morning, like an hour and a half late. And she came in eventually and said, "I'm really sorry, I was watching Frasier." And like everyone, including the teacher, went, "Yeah, fair enough." Fair enough.
Yeah.
No, it's unstoppable. I think so. I think that the fact that it has this slot in the schedule, I don't think any other TV comedy has. Like an hour a day, going up against titans like this morning. Jeremy Vine, doing really well in the rating. 6th of May last year, 2023, BBC One, BBC Two, ITV1, showing the King's coronation. Channel 4 is showing Frasier. that is the one stranglehold it has over the schedule. So it has that special place in people's hearts, and they like going back to it. They're like kind of drawing from the well. It's comforting. It's that nostalgia factor that I think obviously watched it when they were growing up with their family, and it's like the perfect kind of ease into the day.
And again, a long runner, 11 seasons, 264 episodes, which again, I think, that long running speaks to its success, to its quality as one of the best ever. Did it, again, manage to maintain that quality throughout?
So I think what happened with what Frasier did, which I think a lot of comedies didn't do, is at one point it does go off the boil. So when Niles and Daphne actually get together, commonly, that's when people think, okay, it wasn't as good as it was before.
Yeah, the moonlighting curse.
Exactly. But what happened was the show recognised it. I think they've spoken about this as well in the past, that they said, okay, that didn't quite work. So the final season, they pivot. And they kind of get some writers back in, they kind of go back to what it was. And so the final season is actually one of the best seasons of all. So rather than kind of carrying on ad infinitum, naming no names, Dane, with certain animated comedies, and they kind of said, okay, no, this is it, this is perfect. And they kind of did a good job of actually kind of wrestling it back.
And Simpsons and Peep Show are both great shows, but neither of them have a blues-style theme song sung by the lead actor. So,
I wouldn't
Peep
mind
Show has
seeing
a pretty
David
good
Mitchell.
I think
David
Peep
Mitchell
Show's
singing
theme tune is pretty good.
to Peep Show.
both pretty
Lisa's
good.
birthday song is, for me, one of the best songs ever.
Some great songs, to be fair, that have come out of The Simpsons. Well, Radio Times audience has also been having their say on this topic across Facebook, X, and Threads. So the results of our fan poll are in. At number 5 for best ever TV comedy with 5% of the vote, you have Blackadder. At number 4 with 7% of the vote, you have Porridge. Number 3 with 10% of the vote, Dad's Army. Number 2 with 11% of the vote, I think you mentioned it earlier, Nancy, Fawlty Towers. Number 1 with 13% of the vote, Only Fools and Horses. Not something that came up today, but of course, iconic, a favourite. Also popular, some of which have been mentioned here today, The Royal Family, One Foot in the Grave, MASH, which is again huge in the US, Frasier, and Cheers.
Someone's got my back.
And The Office. All great shows. We'll keep your eyes peeled for more best ever polls coming to Radio Times social feeds soon. But the time has come to find out which of you sits atop the comedy throne. Dane, you argued that The Simpsons was the best ever TV comedy. Nancy, you were backing Peep Show. And Christian, your vote went to Frasier. Who is today's winner and the recipient of our best ever trophy? These are all excellent picks. They're all clearly among the best ever TV comedies, but which is the best ever? Tough, but I think I'm gonna say, because it was an international success story, transcended the usual scale and scope of TV comedy, it became a global phenomenon. It appealed to a huge audience across all ages. I think for that reason, I'm going to say that the best ever TV comedy is officially The Simpsons. Dane,
Thank you.
congratulations.
It feels good. I mean, it's not my own intellectual property, but I'm a fan, and I think being able to objectively and subjectively comment on the greatness of my choice is good. I hope I've done it justice.
I think The Simpsons is a brilliant win. I think it was definitely in my top 10, and to be honest, I could have pretty much argued for any of the comedies in my top 10.
I think Frasier is the best TV comedy, but if you're going to lose, you might as well lose to The Simpsons, which is a fantastic show. And Dane too, who's great.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Best Ever. What did you make of our verdict, and what do you think is the best ever TV comedy? Let us know on X @Radio Times. We're bringing you new episodes of The Best Ever weekly, so be sure to head to radiotimes.com/The Best Ever for all the latest news and exclusive content from each new episode. If you're listening to the podcast, you can also subscribe and review The Best Ever on your podcast outlet of choice. That's all for now, but join us again soon for more of The Best Ever.